The Babble section brought some really good questions this week regarding AEW and WWE, and even a question about an extreme legend. We answer them now in the Squared Circle Psycho Babble. My name is Michael Valenti. Joining me is Ralph Valenti. Ralph, we'll start with a question from Tom Foolery Movement. Is CM Punk the worst AEW champion so far?
I'm going to say yes by default. His title reign and run, or runs, whatever you want to call it.
He had two title wins.
Have been riddled with controversy and injury. And they've only had like 5 champions. So yeah, I think it has been the worst.
If you have a report card of all the title reigns in AEW so far, CM Punk's would be an I, incomplete, because he didn't really get a chance to be a champion. He just won a belt, but he never defended it in a match, and he got hurt. So you can't really say he's the worst of the ones that actually had reigns and defenses and whatever. I think that title goes to Hangman Page, and it's not his fault at all. Next question comes from MKASP PDO64. Will Sting ever have a singles match in AEW? If so, who will his first opponent be?
I don't see Sting having a singles match because, for one, he's had a pretty significant neck injury that had to be like, what, less than 10 years ago?
Maybe it was 2015.
Yeah, no, I think the way they've been using him has been good. Tag matches, cinematic matches, backstage segments, run-ins, walk-ins.
He has been doing a lot of these no-holds bars and lights out and whatever, though, and taking some serious bumps in the process. So having just a basic singles match actually might be safer than what he's been doing in these tag team matches. If he does go that route, Darby turning on him or he turns on Darby is really the only way you go about it. Some might speculate Miro, or if Malachi Black comes back, someone in the House of Black. But next question comes from Siege Luigi. Does AEW have too many championships? And he does point out that he could count 17 members of the AEW roster have some sort of title in AEW right now.
I mean, just strictly AEW titles, they probably don't, I think, but when you expand it into all of the titles that they try to use and promote on their on their shows, make up too much. I think for the ones that they have for the actual AEW championships, they have a hard enough time, promoting those champions and those titles and making them feel like prominent, intricate parts of storylines and stuff like that. So I'm going to say yes, they do have too many titles.
Well, let's break it down. You have the World Championship, the TNT Championship, the All-Atlantic Championship for men's singles. You have the AEW World Women's title, the TBS title. Then you have the tag titles and the trios title. So that's 7 titles. You go with WWE, for example, they have the Universal and WWE Championship, although they're unified right now. Same with the tag titles for Raw and SmackDown. Then you have the Intercontinental and the US title. You have the women's Raw and SmackDown titles. You have the tag team titles. And then if you want to count NXT, you have the NXT title, the North American title, and the women's title with the women's tag title. So that's nearly twice as many as AEW. But no one ever says, oh, WWE has too many titles. And granted, they do a brand split, so that's why there are as many titles. But still, nonetheless, we recently saw New Japan Pro Wrestling announce the New Japan World TV Championship. If anybody complains about AEW having too many titles, New Japan just added yet another one. And they have the IWGP World Heavyweight Championship. They have the US title. They have the Never Openweight Championship. They have the heavyweight tag titles, the junior tag titles, the Never Openweight Trios titles. They have the King of Pro Wrestling title. They have the TV title that they just added. Then they got all these other titles for New Japan Strong. They have a lot of damn titles. So I never want to hear AEW having too many titles if you don't watch New Japan Pro Wrestling, because my God, they have a lot of damn titles. Almost everyone on the damn roster has some sort of title in New Japan Pro Wrestling. AEW does not have that many titles. It only seems like they have that many titles because, one, they don't really showcase them that well on weekly television outside of the World Championship. And 2, you've got the Ring of Honor, titles that get brought in. Sometimes the IWGP United States Championship gets brought in. You have FTR carrying 3 different titles from 3 different promotions that neither one is AEW. That's where the conversation is about too many titles. But AEW themselves, no, not at all. The next question here is, should Ruby Soho be the one who dethrones Jade Cargill as the TBS champion, considering Jade beat her to become the champion and Ruby lost all her momentum after that? Would be a great redemption story. And that comes from Vorn Sorensen. If I pronounced that wrong, I apologize.
They could build her back up. I mean, she's hurt. Even before that, she was kind of stagnant after her debut and all that stuff. So that could be said for any of them. That could be said for her. That could be said for Athena. Take your pick of any of the women that have debuted and then kind of been put on the back burner.
You know, and even some of the AEW women originals like Hikaru Shida and Riho and Nyla Rose. And now it seems like we're getting a storyline now with Nyla Rose stealing the TBS championship from Jade Cargill, seeing a face turn, so to speak, with Nyla Rose and kind of being herself for once. And if you ever see her on Twitter, she actually is quite hilarious. She does have acting experience, and now she finally gets to showcase that a little bit. I don't know why she's not on TV all the time. If anyone right now is going to take that title off of Jade, I would think Nyla Rose. I don't really see anybody else. But again, they have to build her up too, just like Ruby Soho or Athena, or when Chris Statlander recovers, she comes back. They just don't build anybody. They just have random women's matches. Next question, go to WWE. Speaking of their women's division, comes from Unrealized Thoughts. Huge talk in the IWC on whether or not Damage Control is working in WWE. What are your thoughts?
There's a few things you can question about Triple H's booking and storytelling to this point. I think one of the blemishes has been the fact that Io and Dakota Kai lost their initial tag match and then ended up winning the titles. Like, what was that? Less than 2 weeks later. Bayley did not beat Bianca, which I kind of expected her to, because I felt like I think they need to maybe add somebody that can bring a little something to that group. I don't know.
It's kind of like the Judgment Day, where when Finn took over, you're like, what the hell are they doing with Judgment Day? They weren't really getting reactions. There wasn't really a storyline. They were losing all these matches. But then they took Dominic, and things are actually working for them right now. And they're getting the heat. And Dominic suddenly has gotten a character out of nowhere and is actually starting to work now with the dynamic of Rhea Ripley. Finn Balor is, starting to become more of a presence with his promo than he is in his in-ring stuff. And granted, they went back to the AJ Styles well, but we'll see how that develops now that the Good Brothers are there, if that's just short term or they're permanently there. Damage Control, I think, is in the same situation. When they first joined, no one was reacting. No one. It was silent. And I'm like, oh shit, this is not good. If this was Vince running the show, Damage Control would already be split up. Bayley would turn face and Io Sky would be taking loss after loss after loss, and Dakota Kai would be in catering. Bayley is getting the heat, but Dakota and Io still get nothing, despite having decent matches, despite having some decent promos backstage. And sometimes this happens, and you see this in pro sports where like a college breakout star goes to the pros and just doesn't make the transition. Perhaps Io Sky and Dakota Kai are like that. Maybe adding another person to create more of a character within the Damage Control, an Indy Hartwell, bringing Candice LeRae over, whoever it may be. But if it worked for Dominic and Judgment Day, I don't see why it can't work for someone, a fourth member of Damage Control. But it did not help their cause that Bianca Belair single-handedly beated them in that ladder match with no Alexa Bliss and no Asuka, even though they were injured, and that's why they weren't on the show, whatever the case may be. That's head scratching to me. All right, next question comes from Sam, and he asks, would you use Bray Wyatt as a special attraction or an every week wrestler?
I don't think he needs to wrestle every week. I think he should be on the show every week. I think you probably signed him to a big contract. He just came back, got a great reaction I think that they could do something very much like and this has been proven to work too. You know, look at Mick Foley. There was Mick Foley, then he had like the three faces of Foley, and depending on the storyline and based on the situation, when he was in a major blood feud, he would be Cactus Jack and he'd be wrestling Edge and he'd be going into barbed wire and everything else. When he was comedic, he was Dude Love. When he was, you know, whatever the case may be, wanting to enter the Royal Rumble, he was Mankind. I think they could do something very, and, you know, even to Jericho's credit, Jericho's calling back to all his former monikers, you know, the Painmaker. He is the Lionheart, you know, all of this stuff. So I think Bray Wyatt himself could be there every week, and he's good enough to cut promos and just be himself. But if the feud calls for it, he could be the Fiend, or he could be the Eater of Worlds, or he can be, you know, the Bayou Swamp guy or whatever, you know?
Yeah.
So I think every week.
I think his character needs to be on consistently. He doesn't necessarily have to be out there every week cutting promos or doing Firefly Funhouse segments per se, but he needs to be involved some way each and every week on SmackDown. Our last question comes from Shea Aganubi, and he's been asking this, I don't know how long. I've seen him ask this question at least once a week for the last month or so. Despite the controversy surrounding his name, does New Jack get the credit he deserves in regards to the impact he's made in the wrestling business?
Didn't New Jack have his own episode of, what's that show? Beyond the Ring or Beyond?
Dark Side of the Ring.
Dark Side of the Ring. If you have your own episode, I would say you've had some type of impact on pro wrestling. I was a big ECW fan. I watched a lot of New Jack and ECW. I can't say I'm a big enough fan of his to truly know what type of legacy he left on pro wrestling. And that's not a bad thing. I'm just saying, like, in order to fully understand his influence, I would have to have paid attention to his career more. And because I was kind of young when he was, you know, certainly working, I think it was where, Rocky Mountain?
Smoky Mountain.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, was run by Jim Cornette and pushed him to the moon.
So I was not paying attention to him there. I did watch him in ECW.
It depends on how you want to look at it. From a mainstream aspect, he had very little impact, I think. If you want to say, oh, people emulate his style now. Who? There's a reason why he wasn't really a focal point in WWE or WCW and any other big promotion. Because that style of wrestling does not work at the mainstream level. You can emulate it all you want, but it has its ceiling. And yes, WWE does hardcore matches and Extreme Rules matches. Yes, AEW does their lights out matches and have done some things that, you know, people would say, oh, it's pushing the boundaries. They're going too far. They're alienating their audience. Yes, I get that too. But can you really say anyone in AEW or WWE right now is emulating New Jack style for ECW and what that did for the wrestling business and saying, hey, you can have this, you know, underground third, you know, basically like a third party in the two big promotion race? Yeah. But when it comes to the mainstream audience, casual or diehard, whatever you want to say there, that whole argument, there's a recipe that just works, that caters to a wider audience. And what works is storytelling. You could do that with death matches sometimes, but more often than not, it's just, how can I get this guy to bleed? And people might hate me for that comment, but that's really what it comes down to. What stupid shit can I do to get the crowd going, oh, holy shit, holy shit, holy shit? Or say whatever three letters of the promotion they're working at that week. GC dub, AE dub, EC dub, Elemental P, QRS, whatever the case may be. I think he gets a bad rep. I will agree with that. And the Dark Side of the Ring episode kind of opened my eyes to that. But if you have a question for us on our next Ask SCPB episode, there are a few ways you could do it. You can hit us up on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter, SCPB Podcast. You could comment on the below the video. We do give higher priority to those who support us through super thanks, and you can also get some cool perks like ad-free episodes, early access, and more by becoming an SCPB member. Click join underneath this video. And of course, you could be a part of the Babble section simply by subscribing, and we'll see you on the next episode of the Squared Circle Psychobabble.